Hey guys, it's Jan, it's Friday, and I'm here for a Friday Reads. Well, I finished 3 things this past week. The novella, A Taste of Honey, and a new literary fiction book, and a classic science fiction novel. Let me tell you about them. I haven't got a great deal of time, so I'm going to try and be succinct. A Taste of Honey by Ashante Wilson is a shorter work, and it tries to do a lot of things. I think it was largely successful, but it wasn't for me. As I said in my video last week, it really wasn't what I was expecting. It opens on this love story, and the first section was just a really straightforward love story between a prince and a foreign diplomatic soldier, and the two of them are against the tide. After the first, lovey-dovey section, there's all sorts of more interesting stuff, like SFF-wise, that goes on, but it still really wasn't for me. And one of the things that really kind of irked me is that there's very few female characters in it, and the one significant female character in it, I reckon, got particularly short shrift in service of the plot, and that never really sits that great with me. So it was fine, but not for me. The second one that I read was Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. Now, George Saunders, you may or may not know, is this incredibly famous, lauded writer, but this is his first novel. He is super famous for short stories. I am not a big fan of short stories, so he's not somebody that I've read before, but I have been intrigued by things that I've heard, and lots of people who I respect say that he's good. So when he had a novel coming out, I thought, I'd have a look at that. This is the Lincoln in the story is Abraham Lincoln, or at least Abraham Lincoln's family, because actually the central character in the story is Lincoln's son, Willie, who died at the age of, I think it was 11. And what I wasn't expecting is this story is basically all after he died. There's a few little flashbacks of him earlier, but it's a ghost story, as in like it's a story about the shades of different people interacting in a cemetery, which is not something I've read a huge amount of, and it was interesting. It was certainly very well written. As an advisory, if you were planning on reading this, I would suggest not to read it as an ebook, because there is very sort of particular formatting in it, and often when you're reading an ebook you're getting less line length, and the formatting didn't really work super well. So paper would be the way to go if you're going to read this one. I enjoyed it. Again, not super really my thing, but it was well done, and I'm glad that I read it. It wasn't too long. The one thing I would say about it is that it had one of the ghost characters is a clergyman, and the religious, like the afterlife-y religious backdrop, which is not a huge amount of what's going on, surprisingly, given we're in the afterlife, but the religious-y stuff that's going on is not Christian at all. We've got kind of weighing hearts kind of thing to make judgment calls, which sounds to me like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, not, the gospel according to Jesus Christ. But and I was really confused why this character, who was a clergyman, didn't have more of a Christian kind of understanding of what was going on. But there's that. So that was that. The third book that I read was by far the best, like for me, the most thought-provoking and intriguing, and really made me want to kind of read it again, actually, and that was Philip K. Dick's classic, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? I read this for my In Real Life book club, which is next Tuesday, and I was halfway through when something in my life exploded, and I'm not going to be able to get to the book club on Tuesday, but I'm so glad that I was prompted to read this by my book club pick. This is a super fantastic book, and I don't understand why I'd not read it before. I love Blade Runner, the movie. Love, love, love. I love Philip K. Dick, what I've read of him, which is mostly short stories, which kind of contradicts what I said earlier about George Saunders, but a number of years ago, a colleague of mine who knew that I read science fiction and doesn't read at all any science fiction bought me as a present a collection of Philip K. Dick short stories, and they were really good. This, I think, is the first full-length book of his that I've read, and it is so interesting. There are so many interesting themes going on in there. Being a big fan of the Blade Runner movie, it's really great. The similarities and differences between the movie. It's not at all. The movie is not at all a play-by-play of the book, and yet they're all the same characters and basically the same action. And things that came out of the movie. Because I'm reading it in this order, like having seen the movie, things that came out of the movie inform my reading of the book. But there's a whole bunch of really interesting stuff about what life is, what constitutes life. For the, 1.5% of people who don't know the story of Blade Runner, it's about this dude, Deckard, who is basically a bounty hunter, but not for people, for replicants, which are androids, humanoid robots. Humanoid robots are legal off Earth, but not on Earth. This is in the movie. In the book, it's slightly more nuanced than that. Anyway, and he works for the police, and he is given this job to take. There's this group of super advanced and replicants who have come to Earth and who have, escaped the colonies and come back to Earth, and it's his job to track them down, and hence the story. There is a really weird religious sub-theme in this. When I was doing a little bit of secondary source reading, having really loved the book, I found out that Philip K. Dick, and I'm not sure whether it happened before or after him writing this book, actually had a kind of vision which informed a lot of his later work. I have a feeling it might be after this, because this is not in the second half of his, this was written in the 60s. Anyway, there's really some weird but intriguing religious thematics and just all this just amazing stuff about life, and it's a dystopic world but in a really interesting way. Well, how is it that there's any thousand number of dystopian worlds in books at the moment and they all feel the same? How does that happen? When you look back to older dystopias, each one is distinct and they have different things to say. Freak me out. Anyway, loved it. And as I said, I really at some point want to go back and read it again, but it's not going to be straight away, because 4 books on the trot of male authors, and they all kind of had quasi-dodgy female representation. This is including, I also picked up Roth, which I said last week that I had on my e-reader, which is the 4th in a, that's what I'm reading right now. I'm sorry, this is a jumble. What I'm reading right now is John Gwynne's Roth, which is the 4th in the Faithful and the Fallen series. And it's a really great kind of old-fashioned epic fantasy series, with just enough shades of grey to make it interesting, but still having good guys to root for, which is what I need. And I've read the first 3, and there's too many place names, and there's too many different kingdoms, and there's too many different intrigues, but the characters are so well drawn, I'm sucked in anyway. So this is the final one, and I'm finishing it off. But yeah, I realized I just need some women. I need some women authors. I need some really meaty female characters. I have got Brothers Ruin by Emma Newman from the library. I have got Phantom Pains by Mishell Baker from the library. I'm super excited by both of those. I also picked up a humble bundle of Women of SFF, which has got, I don't know, like 20. Some of them are novellas, some of them are novels, science fiction and fantasy stories written by women, and I'm going to slog through some of them and really enjoy it. That's my goal for the next little while. Yes, that is it. That's what I'm up to. I'd love to hear what you're up to. If you have read any of these stories, A Touch of Honey, Blade Runner, no, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, or the other one, Lincoln in the Bardo, I'd love to hear what you thought about it. I hope you're all well, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.